Hey everyone, today I'm back in Lost Ark with a video that has actually been requested a couple of times, which is that I'm going to be showing off my builds for all of my characters. Now I do have too many characters and half of them don't really have a build going on, so I'm only going to be showing a build for the 6 characters that I play the most, which are also my 6 gold earners, as they're all 1370, which is where I can get them legendary gear in tier 3, so that's where you like kinda start getting into the build crafting of the game. For some characters, also their build kind of changed as I went through the leveling process, because if you played Lost Ark before, you'll know that hitting level 50 is definitely not going to be the end game, and there is a very big progression past level 50 as well that makes your character play very differently. So if there is a build that I'm playing right now that I think is very bad when you first get your character to level 50, then I'll also go over an alternative build that you could play until you hit tier 3, because tier 3 is kind of where a lot of other builds become more viable, as you get access to more stats, and also by that point you'll probably have done some more horizontal progression and have more access to runes and skill points and that kind of stuff, which is quite important for some of the builds that I like to play, or at least one of them in particular. So with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the builds, starting with my Sorceress. So my Sorceress is my main character, quite high item level as you can see. For this one, there's been a lot of changes, I guess you could say. Like, for example, started off playing with spec swiftness, now it's spec crit. The reason why I can go crit now is because I have a very high level cooldown gem for my Doomsday, so things will change around here. Now, Sorceress has 2 playstyles. You have the Igniter one, which is a very slow, immobile playstyle that focuses around the burst window, and then you have Reflux, which is a more fast-paced, mobile, like instant casting mage instead. Both playstyles are about as bad as each other when you first start out at level 50, so just pick your own poison. But once you get into tier 3, things start to become a whole lot better. But it's not until you hit 1445, where you get access to your relic gear over here, that it becomes really good. The main reason is because you have mana issues for both the Igniter and the Reflux build as you're leveling up. It is better when you have like a support in your party, but still with Reflux you're definitely going to run out of mana. But it's not until you get access to the Nightmare Flower relic set, where it cuts your mana cost quite hard, that it actually becomes very fun to play, because you're just not going to be running into mana issues anymore, and then you can just start spamming your spells. In terms of the stat priority, usually you want to go specialization and swiftness as you're leveling up, because you're just going to be very slow and clunky until you get things like your Galewind runes and such. Like this are going to be making Sorceress feel a whole lot smoother, which is why you usually go swiftness first when you don't have access to those yet. And even at tier 3, I would still recommend you go swiftness, so that you can get your double Doomsday. So what you technically want to do with Sorceress, when you do your burst window, is you cast your Doomsday first, which is this big meteor that you're landing. This is your highest damage skill. These other 2 always want to be in there as well. But what you want to do then is, before this bar runs out down here, is you want to be able to cast a second Doomsday. And then as you can see, right before it times out, it still hits that window, and then now I'm out of my burst. Now, because in the early game you're not going to be as fast, that is why you want to run swiftness, because swiftness does give you cooldown reduction. So going spec swift, as well as having a level 6 gem, I believe is enough for your Doomsday. That allows you to hit like 2 Doomsdays underneath that burst window. The reason why you want to go crit later is because you don't really have much crit. Like for example, this is about 17% I get. I believe it is 25 from my Ignite burst as well. So it's going to bump up my crit rate a lot, and I'm going to be critting a whole lot more consistently. I didn't crit it here all that often, but when you have like a crit synergy in your party, you're going to be critting most of the time during your Ignite window. So that's why you want to go crit as your secondary stat. Once you can go for a high enough cooldown gem. Level 8 is enough to fit 2 Doomsdays in, but it's going to be incredibly tight. Level 9 makes it very comfortable, so that's why I went for 1 very high level gem, because I just wanted to have that more comfortable Ignite window. So that's kind of like the idea behind my stat spread. Spec Swift early game with like a lower cooldown gem, and then once you have high level cooldown gems, that's when you can go into Spec Crit instead for more damage. As for engravings, I got Grudge, Ignite, Hitmaster, All Out Attack. if you're going into the early game where you do not have the crit substat just yet, you can switch out Grudge for Precise Dagger, for example, because that's going to give you, I believe, 20% crit rate. So that's something that you could run in the beginning. When I switch over to my relic accessories, which I'm in the process of trying to acquire right now, I'm also going to be adding on Cursed Doll. So if you want to stay with Spec Swiftness, switch out Cursed Doll for Precise Dagger, for example, but the bigger ceiling, I guess you could say, is going to be running Grudge and then running crit over here as well. For my gems, it's just going to be a mix of damage gems and cooldown gems. Most important cooldown gem, I would say, is the Doomsday one, so that you can fit 2 in there. And then outside of that, just get damage for, let me just do by skill here, as you can see. Damage for all of your damaging skills, and then cooldown reduction for pretty much everything else. So that is what I got over here for my gems. And then for my cards right now, just running Lost Windcliff, as that is just gonna boost my crit rate a bit more, as I don't have the Light of Salvation Awakening yet, which I will switch over later. And then for the relic set, there's only really one choice, Nightmare Flower, because it works with your MP. Now the other thing that Nightmare Flower does is when you use your Awakening, you're going to be getting a buff called the Magic Addiction. This is going to make it so that I just deal 15% flex extra damage with every skill that costs MP, which is going to be all of my skills, because all of my skills cost MP. This will also increase my MP cost for every ability that I use by 7% of my maximum MP. So this is going to drain my MP a lot further. But on the other hand, once you drop too low with your MP, the buff changes to the mana regeneration state. I don't actually know exactly what it's called. And then my cooldown reduction is going to go up quite a lot. My mana regeneration is also going to go up a lot. So this is not really something that you make use of for the Igniter build, but for example, an alternative build you can run is Reflux, which does use, or does make use of this. So I'm just very quickly gonna put some skills on my hotbar. Like, this is not necessarily the Reflux build, but this is something that you could run, for example, and then this. So this is like an example of the Reflux build. I'm also going to change my stats real quick. So there we go, I have Reflux now, and I also want a lot more swiftness for this build. The reason why you want more swiftness for this is because you want to stay in that mana recovery state a whole lot more. So as you can see, you can just spam out your spells. This one doesn't really have casted spells, so you're very mobile as well, and because it locks you out of using the like the burst window with Igniter, you actually get to use your gauge on like going very fast around the map essentially. So you're very mobile, you're very fast, and then once my mana hits 100%, that is where the cooldown reduction state is going to end. So you want to try and stay in here as long as possible, because this is where you get your big damage, and you're then very mobile as well. So it's also a very fun playstyle for Sorceress. I've had a very hard time like deciding if I want to go for Reflux or for Igniter, but because I've just already invested so much in the Igniter playstyle, that's why I'll probably stick with that for a little while. But both of them work just fine. So these are all the skills that I've got set up for this. Let's see if it will switch back. It does. So we have Blaze. This one is your synergy skill. So if you apply this to the boss, take 6% damage extra from your entire team. I went with Charge Flame, so I get 2 stacks of this in case I miss the first one. Makes it really easy to keep up the debuff. If the boss was to move around a lot, or it's a tiny boss like Vicus, for example, you can take this one instead. This will make it so that it like spreads left and right. So it's a much bigger area, which makes it easier to kind of like keep this on the boss, I guess you could say. Then our 3 big hits are going to be the Fireball, Explosion, just taking full damage tripods, Doomsday again, full damage tripods, and Punishing Strike, also full damage tripods. I just take the AoE here because there's like Paralyze is useless and I don't need the mana reduction, so that's why I'm taking AoE. Also makes it easier to hit the boss. Then for gauge generators, we have Rime, Arrow, and Frost Call. The important ones here are Enlightenment. I also got this one to level 5, this tripod, very important. And here, same thing, Enlightenment level 5. You want to put your Wealth runes on both of those skills. And we also still have Esoteric Reaction. This just does good damage, and you can use it quite often if you have the cooldown reduction here. And this is also going to generate a decent amount of specialization as well for your meter. So that's why I like to use this one as well. You can also just get this to restore some MP, but again, you don't really need that. unless you find yourself running out of MP a lot in the beginning, for example. Like in the early game, you could take this tripod instead of the quick prep, but I like running quick prep later on because it's just more damage. Last skill that I have is Inferno. This is your utility skill. So this final like skill slot, I guess you could say, is something that you can choose for yourself. Right now I am running the Ice Turtle a lot, who needs a lot of weak point in his first phase, so that is why I take this with the +1 weak point and then also 2 charges, so I can just break his armor a lot faster. If I don't need the extra weak point, I go Rift Acceleration for the faster animation, so it's easier to land. And if I'm doing something that requires a counter like Valtan or the Guardian before Turtle Descaluda, then I would take one of the counters. We have 2 counters that you can use. Can't find the first one there, there's Squall. This one has a long range. You can also use Agile Cast to increase the casting speed. But outside of that, nothing too special. This is just a long range one, and then Ice Shower is the one that I like to use. Again, you can take Agile Cast here for faster casting speed, but more importantly, you can take a Tenacity one, which grants you push immunity, meaning that you cannot get knocked off your feet when you're using this. And I quite like using this in Valtan, because then you can't get hit by like a random pattern and miss your counter skill, for example. So that's why I prefer to use Ice Shower. But on certain fights like Vicus, I'm probably gonna switch over to Squall because I'm often too far away from her to actually counter her. So that's why that might be more useful. So rotation for Igniter is then something like this, where you wanna just use all of your big hits during the Igniter window. And then we just kind of wait around. Like as you can see here, I'm not really doing much because I'm just waiting for cooldowns to come back and then get that second Doomsday in there. Then once you're out of gauge, that is where you want to try and recover everything. So we're just going to be using our skills. And then by the time our Doomsday comes back, that is when we're actually going to be able to go into our second Ignite window. So as you can see, a lot slower pace because, well, I just don't have much swiftness. And also because I have more casted abilities. So here we have our Doomsday ready again. And then I can just go back into the Ignite window to just have my big burst damage. Now the reason why this is so much more immobile is because we don't really get to make use of our blink, which is that thing that you saw me use to like zip around the map. So that's kind of that. So if I recover my resources, this thing right here, the blink, this is something that you don't want to use when you're playing Ignite because it eats away from the same gauge that you're using to go into your Arcane Rupture. So this Arcane Rupture thing right here, this starts draining your gauge, and this is what gives you that increased casting speed, the cooldown reduction on your active cooldowns, and then also the bonus damage and the crit rate and such. So with Ignite, you want to get to this magic amp state as much as possible, and using Blink is going to eat away from that gauge. So that's why you don't necessarily want to be using that too much. So Igniter, immobile, high burst damage, and then you have Reflux, which is basically no burst damage, but a very fast build that is also very mobile because you get to use Blink as much as you want. The reason why you don't use Arcane Rupture is because you simply can't. Like when I equip my Reflux again, as you can see, you're locked out from using Arcane Rupture, so it only leaves you with Blink to use for your Reflux build, which is why it's a lot more mobile. You can also do a casting Reflux build like this, is literally possible to use for Reflux as well. You would just change your setup, that you don't have specialization but like higher crit and higher swiftness, and then you can play casting Reflux, because that's also a way that you can play Reflux. If you still want the casting mage aspect of Sorceress, but you still want to be very mobile and not worry about having burst windows to play around. So that does it for Sorceress. Let's then move on to the next one. So second character right here is my Destroyer, the fearsome Mokoko skin wielder. This one doesn't really have multiple playstyles really, you just essentially have the same thing of having your blue skills, which whenever you use blue skills you're going to be charging your cores right here, and then you spend those cores on your purple skills, and you always want to have 3 cores before you use a purple skill, because the more cores you have, the stronger the purple skill is going to be, and also the bigger of a shield you get. So as you can see, whenever I use it, I get a little shield around me that is actually quite strong as well. So Destroyer, very durable character, kind of like a tanky one. You also have a Provoke with Endure Pain. This thing also makes it so that you take like 90% reduced damage for 5 seconds. So it's really amazing to tank through attacks. But you kind of need it because Destroyer is a very slow class, and you also have some very long casting times, as you can see right here. So it's kind of like the Sorceress of the melees, like the Igniter Sorceress of the melees, in terms of like how immobile the class itself is. As for the stats and such, like right now I'm just in my Argos set right here, going very high on crit and some on swiftness. Later down the line you can go crit spec swiftness, because specialization does increase the damage of your purple skills. So if you want to go like full damage, you go crit spec. Because I do want to be able to move a little bit, I also throw some swiftness in there, because otherwise I'm gonna move around like a snail. As for my engravings, level 3 Grudge, I am a very tanky character, so I actually barely feel the fact that I'm using Grudge, so that's why I throw that in there. Rage Hammer is my class engraving that I'm going to be using. I'll talk about the other class engraving in a second as well, but this is the more popular one, just increases the damage of my purple skills. And then Supercharge, I feel like this one is kind of necessary. You have 3 charge skills, which this is the first one, then this is the second, and then this is the third one. So because we have so many charge skills, because they're also kind of slow to charge, that's why Supercharge is really important. So when you're building up your Destroyer from like tier 1, try and get Supercharged to level 3 as soon as you can. You're gonna thank me for it. Other engravings you can go Cursed Doll. Barricade is also a really good one, because your 4 main damage skills all give you a shield. So that's why you can go with Barricade. Can also get Master Brawler because you're a head attack class, so that's also something that you can do right there. Gems, everything level 5, I'll just show them by skill. Mostly just going to be damage gems for the 4 purple skills, and then it's just going to be cooldown gems for everything else. And then for cards, again, Lost Windcliff. So that's kind of what my Destroyer looks like. In terms of skills, let's put them over here. Heavy Crush is going to generate 1 core for you. Everything else generates 2 or 3. But because you need 3 cores, because this has such a very low cooldown, you can just very easily hit Heavy Crush plus something else to generate 3 cores for you. So that's why I use that, with also just a faster animation one. Dreadnought is my counter. This is also one of my synergy skills. So this reduces the defense of the foe by 12%, and then some extra outgoing damage over here as well. When you're doing something like Valtan, you can take push immunity on this, plus Tough and Body to reduce incoming damage, to make you very tanky when you're using this skill. But I prefer to go for the armor destruction to have higher uptime on my synergy. Jumping Smash, another one that applies your synergy, also a gap closer. So this one actually travels quite a long distance if you take the tripod for it, so you can use that as your gap closer. That's what I like it for. And then Endure Pain, this one will generate 3 cores guaranteed for you, which is quite nice. You can also take this one to still gain cores when the attack doesn't hit, but I haven't really felt the need for that too much. Just increases the AoE, so that even if you're using it far away, you can still get it. You can taunt with this, which is quite amazing, and then of course Hidden Pain reduces incoming damage by 90%, and then the skill itself also grants you push immunity for its duration, which is going to be for 5 seconds. So this is just an amazing skill to say, like, panic button, press this, you're not going to take much damage, and you're also not going to be knocked off your feet. So again, something amazing to use for Valtan. Then for the DPS skills, we have Full Swing, faster casting speed, make more damage again. So that's why we take that. You can also take Tenacity here if you want, but again, I prefer to take damage for this one. Here we have Perfect Swing, our highest DPS skill, so full damage tripods. You can take Tenacity for this if you want to, because it does have that very long casting time, but what I usually like to do is I use Endure Pain to give me that 5 seconds of push immunity, and then I can fit in the Perfect Swing, so that I don't really need the Tenacity tripod on the skill itself. Then we have Earth Eater, again, tripods for damage, because on the second one, you don't really have a decent damage tripod. I like using Tenacity here so that I at least have one of my purple skills that I can use that has built-in Tenacity, essentially. And then Seismic Hammer, full damage tripods with Quick Prep. Again, you can take Tenacity here if you want to, but if you don't take the cooldown reduction, then your rotation is not going to flow very nicely. So this is just your purple skill that you can use a lot because of the Quick Prep tripod that we have right here, and then just using a lot of Galewind runes, because of course these are mostly going to be very slow casting skills. So a rotation kind of looks like this. Apply your thingy. You can also dodge cancel out of your abilities, and I believe Destroyer is the only class that can animation cancel their dodge roll. So that's something that's kind of cool, I guess you could say. And then you just kind of keep going like this. Make sure that your synergy is applied on the boss, and then also make sure you generate 3 cores before using one of your purple skills. And then if I had a little bit more, or a little bit better cooldown gems, then the rotation would flow a lot better. But in like a realistic scenario, there's almost no time where I am not hitting the boss. So that's kind of Destroyer. Now for your identity, as you can see, there's more than just the cores. There's also this, which is Hypergravity mode, which gives you super armor, gives you a very big shield, and you just whack away at the boss until the duration is over. And that's pretty much that. Now the other class engraving that most people don't play with, play around this Hypergravity mode. So what the class engraving will do is, as long as you're in combat, it will gradually fill up this meter every second until it hits max. Now the other way that you fill this up is by using your purple skills. So whenever I use a purple skill, you can barely see it, but I got a little bit of blue meter on my identity gauge. And essentially if I were to run the gravity training one, there we go, let's apply it, this meter is just going to slowly fill up. So it's just going to allow you to use this like hypergravity mode a whole lot more. So this thing over here, and then it also, like, I believe it increases the damage of your bonks right here as well. So this is more like a meme build, I guess you could say. The main reason why I don't think it's very good is because you need to stand still. Like, the longer you're smashing your hammer, the more attack speed you're going to get, but as soon as you need to stop attacking, you also lose your attack speed. So that's why I prefer to go Rage Hammer, because that increases your crit damage on these skills by like 45%, and also your crit rate by 15, so it allows you to go a little bit lower in crit. So that's why I prefer to go Rage Hammer instead. But if you want to just like go whack a hammer on a boss, you can definitely go Gravity Training as well. It's just that I prefer the other one. For your awakenings then, I guess, for normal skill you want to use Big Bang. This just does the most damage, but I do believe that Terra Break actually gives you a full specialization meter. Yeah, there you can see it. It just immediately filled my gauge. If you're going Gravity Training, then that is the awakening that you want to use, but I prefer using Big Bang because it does more damage, and it's also a pretty cool one. Just goes like this. You get damage reduction while this is casting, and then you just release for a big hit. So that's kind of Destroyer. And then we move on to Scrapper. For this one I play the Taijutsu build. So the way you play Scrapper, there's 2 builds to choose from essentially. You have the one where you have a lot of yellow skills, and you have the one where you have a lot of green skills. The green skills are slower, the yellow skills are faster. Because I'm already playing 2 very slow classes in Destroyer and Sorceress, I decided to go for the fast build over here. The way how Scrapper works is very simple. You have a yellow gauge, which you use on your yellow skills, as you can see right here. So it's gonna drain that, and when I then use my yellow skills, I'm gonna be building up the green gauge. So it's all about like balancing the 2 gauges essentially. Now, because of the 2 engravings, depending on which one you choose, one of your gauges is also going to be generating more than the other. So if you go Taijutsu, you can run more yellow skills, because the yellow gauge regenerates passively a lot more. And then for the shock training build, exactly the same, but for the green gauge instead. As for my build itself, currently still in legendary gear as per usual. Went crit and swiftness about 50-50%. I would like to get my crit a little bit higher than this, but it works out most of the time, especially if I have like a crit synergy. Higher swiftness just means that my build flows so much better, and it actually feels really good. Like, there's barely ever any downtime, especially when I get lucky with this skill, because this has a chance of refunding me the full cooldown. As for engravings, just going to go Keen Blunt. Taijutsu is my class engraving, and then Adrenaline. Keen Blunt works because I have such high crit rate from both my crit stat as well as from running Adrenaline, so Keen Blunt is going to be efficient for me to run. And then I just had a random Lightning Fury one that I was able to get on like my accessories as well. As for gems, mostly level 5 gems. I got like 1 level 6 in here. It's just mostly going to be a mix of like damage and cooldown for most of the skills that I use. The only gem, I guess, that you could change is this one, Fierce Tiger Strike. You don't technically need a cooldown gem for this, but it does make everything flow a little bit smoother, which is why I went for that. Now for cards, Lost Windcliff again, for that crit rate. As for my skills, Charging Blow, this is going to be your gap closer. You can take like bonus distance on this, but then you go like super far, and I never really felt like I needed that, so that's why I let's reset the cooldown so I can actually take this. That's why I took this, to just get some extra damage. As you can see, you already go far enough with that. Battering Fist, this is going to be one of your main damage skills, so you just go full on with the damage tripods. Iron Cannon Blow, same thing, full damage. You can make this like create more shock if you're going shock training, but even if you go shock training, you don't really use this skill. So yeah, full damage and some cooldown reduction. Earthquake, another damage one. The only thing you can change here is you can go to the Power Strike, for example. So this one makes it so that I just flip in place and do my damage immediately. Whereas if I were to take this, it turns it into a combo skill. So it's just whatever you want to prefer. I do believe this does slightly more damage. Yeah, because this is already level 4. So this would do more damage. But this is also faster. So it's kind of like total damage over DPS. It's kind of up to you to decide. Dragon Advent, also full damage tripods. You can take Tenacity here if you want to. This is more a PvP thing, but you could if you really wanted to. And this is also another gap closer, but it does a lot of damage. And it also leaves behind this little like flame area around you that also does damage over time, as you can see. Then my synergy skill is Fierce Tiger Strike. You only need this at level 4 because you just want this, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't really do enough damage, like it got changed to have this tripod right here, which increases its damage by a lot, but the damage of the skill is kind of low, so that's why it's not really worth it in my opinion, which is why I'm just getting this over here. Then for my 2 green skills, because you do still want some green skills in your kit, Roundup Sweep, this is going to be a counter, also hits twice, so it's a really easy counter. It's also a really fast one, so it's actually an amazing one. It's probably one of the best counters in the game. And then the Madman Reinforced Hit, these are the DPS ones, and also turns it into the double punch, because otherwise it's just one punch. You can take the single hit tripod here to just increase its damage, but this is going to give you more potential damage because you're going to be resetting the skill. It has like a 36% chance at my current tripod level. I think it goes up to like a 50% chance at max level, and then as you hit the boss, let me see if I get lucky. As you can see, I get to just keep using this because it just keeps resetting, because both of the hits of the skill have a chance to reset the cooldown. So that's why I like this one quite a bit. Death Rattle is another DPS skill. Even though it is the green one, it still does a lot of damage. This is also one of your main DPS ones if you end up going shock training. So quick prep, single hit, and then also shock explosion, just to go for full damage over there. As for your awakenings, there's 2 options. You have the easier to land Dragon Dive. This is also like an amazing, like a very cool looking awakening, I guess you could say. But it does do like less potential damage than the punch. So that's why I prefer using the punch, because this has like higher potential damage, but the dragon is easier to land. So it's just kind of up to you what you want to use. As for the rotation itself, you just want to make sure that your synergy is applied to the boss at all times, which should be fine because as you can see it's still on there. The skill is already back, also because I have a cooldown reduction rune on that, which makes it a lot easier. The only thing you really need to pay attention to is the fact that you like make sure you don't run out of your green gauge when you do need your counter, because your Death Rattle itself eats your whole gauge. And whenever you use Death Rattle, you also need to make sure you're above 80% gauge, because it's going to deal more damage the higher your gauge is. So if you're getting a lot of resets on your roundup sweep, like I'm getting right here, you need to make sure that your gauge stays high enough so that when you use Death Rattle, that it does get the full damage. Like about over here in the gauge, I would say, is when it's fine. Like you can just use it once. So as you can see, I use my punch once. That still gives me enough gauge to get like a full damage Death Rattle off. That's essentially the only thing you really need to pay attention to. Outside of that, you just go ham. Back in the day, this used to give you a damage buff, so it was a lot about like using the gap closer, making sure your synergy is applied, and then doing like 1 or 2 damage rotations. But now you can literally just use whatever is on cooldown. and then just go from there essentially. You don't have to pay too much attention to that anymore, which makes Scrapper feel a whole lot smoother now than it did before. So that's kind of what Scrapper looks like. Very fun class to play. It's a very short range class as well, like literally all of your skills except the punch are like you really need to be in their ass to hit them. It's also back attack class. But yeah, so everything's super short range except this one. But on the other hand, it's very fast. You're very mobile because you have like 2 gap closers. This is also like a mini gap closer built in. So yeah, definitely doable to stay that close to the boss. Then we have my striker. For this one I'm playing the Esoteric Flurry build. So this is going to be a little bit more mixed stats, crit, spec. High swiftness, because you do want some swiftness to make the rotation flow a whole lot better. Now, currently my striker has a bit of a Frankenstein build, I guess you could say, when it comes down to his engravings, because I am still running Precise Dagger. Reason why I'm running Precise Dagger is because I want a high enough crit rate to make Keen Blunt viable. Now, unlike Scrapper, I can't go high crit rate on this guy, or high crit stat, I should say, because he does want a lot of swiftness, and he also wants some specialization with the build that I'm running. So that is why I am still running Precise Dagger for now, until I get my relic set. Then my relic set is essentially going to be replacing the Precise Dagger engraving, and then I can take something like Cursed Doll, Grudge, and what have you. Outside of that, the class engraving Esoteric Flurry is most efficient at level 1. You can go level 3 if you want, but at level 1 it is going to be enough. So if you can snag a relic accessory with just +5 of Esoteric Flurry, you're going to be good for that, but that's probably going to be incredibly expensive. For gems, I am going to have mostly damage gems on my esoteric skills, which are going to be these 4 you can see light up on my hotbar right now. Everything else is just mainly going to be cooldown reduction, because I do want the rotation to flow as best as possible. The way how Striker plays is very simple. You just fill up these bubbles right here in the middle of the screen, and then I spend those bubbles on my big hits, which are going to be my esoteric skills. Which is where the big damage is going to come in as well. So I essentially have 4 skills that are utility. This one is a counter as well as attack speed buff. This one is going to be my synergy skill, which is going to give crit resistance. This is gap closer plus also big gauge generation, and then I have another gap closer one. Everything else is just going to be pure damage. Now the difference between Esoteric Flurry and the other build, which is Deathblade, is that with Flurry you only have 3 orbs on your gauge, and all of your spenders, regardless of how many orbs they would normally eat, will only like use up 1 of your orbs. So that's why you can run with 4 spenders if you want to do so. The Deathblade build, which I'll just very quickly show what that looks like when I equip this, it gives you 4 bubbles to spend, but when you then use one of your skills, it is going to be eating your entire gauge. So the difference between the two is going to be that with Deathblade, you want to go full in on specialization so that you can build up these 4 bubbles as fast as possible. And then you also only run 2 spenders usually, because you need the other skills to just generate those bubbles for you. Whereas with Esoteric Flurry, you only eat 1 orb per skill, so that's why you can run more spenders. As you are leveling up Striker from a fresh level 50, you'll probably go a bit higher into specialization in the lower levels, because you won't have access to tripods. Like for example, this one generates bonus gauge, this one also generates bonus gauge, I believe. So those are tripods that you want to level up. And then also you'll probably not have wealth runes at the lower levels either. So that's why you want to make up with that for going with higher specialization and maybe only running 3 spenders instead of 4. But as you get higher into the end game, as you get higher specialization stat, as you get wealth runes, and as you get tripods, that's when you can switch over to running 4 spenders instead. So for skills itself, this is one of my damage skills, so full damage tripods. This is another damage skill, so again, damage tripods right here. The only thing that is kind of different is that you can also make it so that you become the tornado, I guess you could say, which makes you like move around while you're the tornado. But I like to have the other one because it makes it so that you can just throw your tornado out and then you can still do all of your other damage, or you can just move about doing other things. So that's why I went with that one. Tiger Punch, again, full damage tripods. You can take Quick Prep if you really want to, but I don't really feel the need for that. Also tenacity one if you need it, but honestly just use it like this, works just fine. And then the Tiger emerges, again full damage tripods. This one again you don't really need any, so quick prep is the best one, makes it flow the best in the rest of your rotation as well. Then for my synergy skills we have Sky Shattering Blow. This is the counter. Extra mobility on the counter is always nice. This gives you an attack speed buff as well as a movement speed buff, and then also generates more esoteric meter for you. Does cost more MP, but you never really have MP issues on this class, so that's why I run this. Also Wealth Rune on this, kind of important. For this one, again, tripod for more esoteric meter, bonus movement if you need it, because this allows you to go quite far, so it's quite nice. Normally this is a combo skill, so as you can see here it does like the kick thing. And then if we get the final tripod right here, this turns it into a holding skill, which you also don't really want that, so that is why I went with the full moon kick, as it just turns it into one smooth animation. So it really makes it a whole lot better. I hated this skill at the beginning, but with full moon kick it actually feels really good. Then Lightning Whisper, this one is going to be your synergy, so attack speed for all party members. And then here at level 3, it also reduces the crit resistance of foes by 10%. So it's going to be both attack speed as well as crit resistance, and then you want to take quick prep so that it flows a whole lot better. And then Dragonstorm Awakening, only thing you really need here is the movement, distance, and that's pretty much it. You can get the extra esoteric meter gain if you really want to. I would assume you can take this if you're going with Deathblade, but if you're not playing Deathblade, you really don't need this, as you're generating plenty of your gauge. Also, another thing that's really cool about Striker is that the Adrenaline Engraving is incredibly good on him, because you can stack it all the way up to 6 before using like a damage skills, because this, as you can see, I get 3 stacks of my Adrenaline already, then this is 4, 5, and then I have 6 by the time I hit my very first damage skill. So that's usually what you're gonna do. You're going to be using your gauge generators, and then you have 2 of your main damage skills that you can use back to back. So you can just do this, apply synergy, 1 damage skill, 2 damage skills, get your gauge back, attack speed buff, and then use the other 2 spenders. And then you just kind of keep it rotating like that. Very low cooldowns, very fast, very maneuverable to play as well, because you do have some like gap closers in your build and such. So that's why it's just an incredibly fun class to play. And even like right out the gate at level 50, while you might need to spec a bit more in specialization instead of swiftness, it's still going to feel incredibly good to play. And of course you only have 3 spenders instead of 4, but still just really fun class to play. Then we have Deathblade. This is one of the classes where I would recommend you play a different build than the one that I'm playing right now, when it comes down to you starting in the early game, because the build I'm playing right now becomes really good in tier 3, even more so at 1370, but before you hit that point it's going to feel awful to play. So that's why I would not recommend this if you're playing Deathblade as a fresh level 50. However, the other option as a fresh level 50 is incredibly good and is also super fun to play, so I'll kind of showcase that later as well. So the build I'm currently playing is Remaining Energy. This is what I have so far. I'll probably be able to finish my Argos set later this week, because I haven't done Argos just yet. Going spec Swiftness. The reason why I'm running Swiftness for now is because I'm just having all level 5 gems at the moment, which here you can see them. Surge is going to be a damage gem, and then I just have a damage gem for my main damage skills, and then cooldown reduction for everything else really. Preferably I would have a higher cooldown gem on Maelstrom, and there's a couple others as well, but because I don't have high cooldown gems, because this is just an alt, that is why I decided to stick with Swiftness for now. Once I do have the higher cooldown gems, I would prefer to switch over to crit instead, so that I can just increase my damage by critting more often. For my engravings right now, Cursed Doll, Supercharge, Remaining Energy, and level 1 Adrenaline I was able to squeeze in. Cursed Doll you technically don't need to run. Preferably I would have run level 3 Adrenaline instead and then just stick to 333. But because I had a Supercharge and a Cursed Doll stone for me to drop, that's why I decided to just stick with this, so I didn't have to buy... actually, let me lock my stone before I accidentally sell that one. So that's why I decided to just do it like this. The 2 most important ones are just going to be your Remaining Energy and your Supercharge. You have 3 charge skills in this build that I'm running, so that's why you really want Supercharge. Gems already showed, cards, same thing right here. Going to be just Lost Windcliff, and then again crit, spec and swiftness, spec crit once I do get access to like relic accessories. I'll probably make the switch over there. As for the skills itself, you have a gap closer that you can use up to 3 times, which also applies your damage synergy. This is going to be your counter, and everything else is just going to be revolving. Oh, you also have this thing, which is a gap closer. Also allows you to go through bosses, by the way. So this is actually an amazing skill to get to the back of the boss, which is also something that I'll show later, a little trick that you can do. But outside of that, the other 4 skills that we have are just going to be pure damage, or well, 5. This thing right here is also a synergy, so it applies not only a movement speed and attack speed buff for yourself, but also for your party. So it's really nice. You have 2 synergies, a damage up on the boss and then the movement speed one. But you really want to use this because it also generates bonus gauge for you. And for remaining energy, it's really important that you generate full gauge, because what you want to do is you just want to generate your gauge. As you can see, those are all charged skills, so that's why we use supercharge. And when our gauge is full, when we use our ability to go into our death strands, this is going to give us massive cooldown reduction on all of our skills. And when I then use my search, this does good damage, but it will also give us a 30% or 30-second buff for movement speed, attack speed, and attack power. This is for our remaining energy build. So the Death Strands itself gives us these buffs, but because of our class engraving that we're running, the buff is going to stay with us even if we exit the Death Strands. So this is essentially going to make it so that we can just get our gauge back before this buff runs out. As you can see right there, I still have the buff, and then I can just kind of keep it rolling like this. Now, of course, this is why I want the cooldown reduction, because I want my Maelstrom to come back. So I'll just quickly reset all of my cooldowns. This is kind of what a rotation would look like. Give my attack speed buff, use my charge skills. I got full gauge, but I can still use this. Reapply synergy. Use my search. Reapply synergy, and then I can just kind of keep it going like that. So with the swiftness that I have right now, it just flows incredibly well, which is why I don't want to get rid of it just yet. But that's essentially how the remaining energy Deathblade kind of plays. As for my skills, so one of my damage skills right here, you'll also be running a lot of Wealth runes for this build, because you do need to get your full gauge back to keep your damage cycles going. So that's why I'm also taking Orb Control here. Damage tripods, this one over here is just going to be full damage tripods. Earth Cleaver, this is your counter, but it does okay damage, so that's why I'm still taking damage tripods as well. This one is going to give you the dash distance, so if you don't have a lot of skill points yet, just make sure that this one is leveled up to level 4, and that's going to be enough for you. This full damage tripods, again, also some attack speed on this to make it faster. Spin Cutter, this is your synergy skill, so take synergy on the first one, and you can go triple spin if you want. The more important one I would say are these two, so leave this at level 7 if you can't afford level 10. Maelstrom, just going to be Orb Control, as well as this is the party synergy buff, so again you can leave it at 4 if you want to help your party out, get it to level 7. Dark Axle, this is the one that allows you to go through bosses, so faster attack speed to just make the animation faster, Tenacity for push immunity, and then High Axle so that you go further and that you can also jump over enemies and such. So this is actually a very important one to get to level 10 in my opinion, because it makes you very safe. And then Blitz Rush, this is going to be crit tripod and then just full damage as well. So that's kind of why I went with that. Now, this is not what I would recommend you play if you're just starting out with Deathblade, because it requires high specialization and it requires Wealth runes, which you'll probably not have when you're just starting out. So what you can do instead is play Surge. Now, the way Surge works is the complete opposite from what I just showed you, and the reason being is that with remaining energy, you go into your stance and then you exit immediately to get that remaining energy buff. But if you go Surge instead, I'm just going to be applying this right here, you actually go into your stance and you stay in your stance, because while you're in your stance, you can see this meter next to my character right here. You can also see it down here. Every time I'm hitting the boss, it is going to be counting my hits, and for each hit that I do, I'm going to be getting a Surge stack. And then at the end, I let go of my Surge, and depending on how far my gauge was, the more damage I'm going to be dealing to the boss. Now, the cool thing about Surge, I'm just going to be switching out some of my skills right here. because I do want it to feel kind of good to play. So I'm just gonna go quick prep whirlpool, this right here. So you do switch out one of your damage tripods, but that's kind of okay because your surge is the thing that's going to be doing the most damage for you. And then I'm also gonna do it like here, because this leaves behind a little puddle on the floor that ticks for damage, and this also makes it a charge, like a holding ability, instead of a charged one. So here it's not super important that you have supercharge because it's only going to be affecting this one skill right here. Outside of that, this is becoming a holding skill, so I don't think it works on that. And this one is also a holding skill, so you don't really need to supercharge that much. So just having level 1 surge, as you can see, this is all my engraving, level 1 surge, it is still going to feel pretty good to play. So the cool thing about surge, and why it's so good at the early game, is because you don't need specialization to fill your gauge. So once you go into your gauge, you can see right here that as soon as I get my 20 stacks, so 17, 18, 19, 20, so I have my full stacks right now, I let go of my surge, and this is going to be refunding my entire gauge. So that is why this is super nice to play at the early game, because it's going to mean that you're going to have a very fluent and good playstyle without relying on very high stats like you do for remaining energy. So let the surge go, and then again, bam, it's back. So that's why this build is incredibly fun to play at the lower levels, because it just doesn't require anything. You don't need supercharge level 3, you don't need wealth runes, you don't need high specialization. It's all nice and dandy. Now the reason why you don't need high specialization is because of your awakening. So if you just go up to the boss, you use your awakening, that is going to be filling your gauge almost enough, complete. So that's when you can just like hit it a few more times with a couple of skills. Maybe you can do like one skill rotation without the Death Strands active. But as soon as you got your Death Strands active, you can just keep it rolling for the rest of the fight. So that is why I would highly recommend you play Surge at the lower levels, because it's just going to be so much better than playing remaining energy. And then as you can see, now I can just keep the rotation going just like that. So that's why I would recommend Surge for lower level. Remaining energy is a little bit more fun in my opinion, but it's only good once you hit tier 3, and it becomes really good once you hit 1370, where you can start getting those extra engravings and that extra specialization stat as well. And then the last class I have right here is Bard. Now my Bard is still a bit of a work in progress, because it was the last class that I got to level 50, so my gems are kind of all over the place at the moment. But luckily enough, Bard doesn't really need them like the other classes do, because you go high swiftness and your damage doesn't really matter because you're a support. So the Bard's playstyle is very different from the other classes, because you're going to be more focused on keeping up your synergies and such, rather than focus on dealing damage. As for my stats, I went with some specialization to fill my meter faster, and then swiftness to just get my cooldowns back faster, because I want to spam out my synergies as much as possible. For engravings, Awakening and Desperate Salvation are very important. Spirit Absorption is kind of like my poor man's heavy armor. So what a lot of people do is they run heavy armor because it makes you incredibly tanky, because Bard is one of the squishiest characters in the game, which is why you go heavy armor, so that you're not squishy anymore. The problem was heavy armor was very expensive when I was building my Bard, so that is why I decided to go with Spirit Absorption instead. Reason why this is still good in my opinion is because Bard has a lot of long animations, and because of that, this is going to be cut by 15% from the Spirit Absorption, and I am also very fast. Like, I'm gonna hit the movement speed cap with the high swiftness and the Spirit Absorption, which is going to make it so that I am having an easier time running out of AoEs. So this is kind of my damage reduction, because I'm just faster with casting, so less animation lock, I'm fasting with movement speed, so I can move out of AoEs faster. So that was kind of my reasoning behind going Spirit Absorption instead of heavy armor, because this was just like 20 times cheaper to go. Then of course the gems, work in progress. You only really need 2 damage gems, which is going to be for your Sound Shock and your Sound Holic. Everything else cooldown gems, that's all you really need to know. And then for the card sets, you want to get maximum HP, because your shields and healing works off your own max HP, so that's why you want this card set. For the late game, Fully Awakened Lost Windcliff is going to be your better one, because it is going to boost the holy damage of, or light damage, I'm not quite sure, I think it's holy damage, of your other party members. And Fully Awakened Light of Salvation, that gives holy damage and turns your damage to holy damage, is the best in slot for your DPS players. So late endgame Lost Wind Cliff Fully Awakened is going to be better. Outside of that, just run this for max HP. You're going to be just fine. So for the skills itself, there's a couple of like optional ones that you can take, which is kind of the beautiful thing about Bard. There's a lot of options that you can choose for. So Sound Shock, this one's kind of mandatory in my opinion, because this is the main way that you keep up your synergy, which is this one right here, Sacred Shock. This is for your synergy buff. The other way you keep up synergy is with Stigma. This is one that you can switch out for something else, like for example, if you want a second counter, you can change this. If you want, like for example, a turret that keeps up your buff instead, you can take Harp of Rhythm, but you do need it to be at level 10. So if you don't have the skill points for this, then you might not want to take this and take this one instead, because this does get it at level 7, whereas the other one gets it at level 10. So you can kind of choose that as well. You can also switch this out for Rhapsody of Light if you want something that's more defensive, because this does make you more tanky, but when you get it over here, it also makes your teammates more tanky, and it also gives you super armor. So this is an incredibly good skill to use during Legion raids and something like that. But for your normal Guardians and such, I don't really feel like this is all too useful. So that is why I take Stigma instead, because this does give me 200% meter gain, so I can push out my heals and my damage buffs a little bit more consistent. So that's why I like running Stigma. Soundholic, this is your damage one, so this is just pure damage tripods. This is also your highest stagger one, so if you have a stagger check, this is the one that you want to save for that, which is why I'm also running the Overwhelm rune on that. Guardian Tune, this is just going to be giving you defenses to the team as well as giving a shield at the end of it if you take Endless Protection. So you can kind of choose, like either you make the damage reduction effect stronger or you add a shield at the end of the cast. Down here, either you reduce the cooldown of it, plus also like the amount of time that it stays active, so you can push it out more frequently, but it's not going to last as long. So this is great when you know when the damage is going to come out or when people are most likely going to get hit. But if that's not the case, you usually want to take this because it blocks one debuff, which can be useful in certain fights as well. So that's why this is kind of like the general purpose one. When you're more experienced on fights, you'll want to take this one, because you can like use your mitigation when it matters more often. Then Prelude of Storm, this is a counter, but this is also the main way for you to generate Serenade meter, so you want to just spam this on cooldown. You want to get this to level 5 as fast as possible as well, because this is going to be generating a lot of meter for you. Heavenly Tune, this is one of your raid buffs, so quick prep, and then we have over here attack speed as well as attack power for your team. When you're doing like solo stuff like Chaos Dungeons, you want to use Tune for me to just make it on yourself. But yeah, this is what you want to run if you want to buff your teammates. Wind of Music, this is going to be one of your defensive ones because this creates a pretty decent shield on your teammates, especially if you're running Expert Engraving as well. This shield is going to be quite fast, and then you can take Melody Increase here to gain more Serenade meter as well. And then we have Sonic Vibration, this is your second damage buff that you can give. So over here we have the Brilliant Wave, this is going to be giving the attack buff to your teammates, and then you make it bigger for your teammates to stand in. So what the gameplay kind of looks like is you want to make sure that you keep this up at all times. So the Sound Shock itself is enough to keep this up 100% of the time, but sometimes you can also just use Stigma to apply it instead. And then I don't need to like constantly spam this to not drain my mana too much, I guess you could say. As for your damage buff, you have this one, Heavenly Tune. This casts in a big AoE around you, so it's very easy to keep up. And then by the time that you see your damage buff runs out, that's when you want to cast this one instead. Now the problem with this is that once you run out, the damage buff is gonna drop. So you do need to make sure that you place this where your teammates have an easy time of getting hit by it. Outside of that, the rest of your skills you kind of want to like use whenever. This one you want to use as much as possible because it generates a lot of your gauge at once, so try to spam that as much as possible. Guardian Tune, you use this when you know that damage is going to be coming out, or you can just spam it on cooldown if people are getting hit by like a lot of random patterns. Wind of Music, same thing, just use that whenever to 1, increase your gauge, but 2, also apply a shield. Again, only problem here is that the shield is very close range, so you do need to position really well for that. And then Soundholic, you can just use that whenever the boss is standing still, you can just finally do some damage. So something would look like this, where you want to keep up your buffs. Then as soon as you see that the buff is about to run out, you place down the second attack buff, and then you just kind of keep it going like that. Your awakening is also very important. This is why you run the awakening engraving, so you get an extra usage of it, and so you also get the extra cooldown reduction on it. What it does is two things. One, applies a giant shield on your party for a few seconds, and two, it gives you 1 gauge for your Serenade meter. So the way that this works is, you get to spend it on 2 skills. Either Serenade of Courage, which is a damage buff for your teammates and for yourself. The one that is on yourself lasts for 2 minutes, but it's mainly for your teammates that you're going to be using it. Or you can use it on Salvation. Now, Salvation is the heal. The problem is that all of your gauge is going to be spent whenever you use the buffs. So as you can see, I have 2 bars and a little bit. If I use my heal, this is going to be consuming everything. So the 2 bars that I had, because the third one wasn't full. In terms of effectiveness, because I am running the Desperate Salvation engraving, the final tick, this one that just happened, is the one that heals the most. So that's why we run Desperate Salvation. Even if you want to be using this the most, it's still better to run Desperate Salvation, because it means that this becomes the most efficient at 1 bar. So as soon as I have 1 bar right here, this is when the buff is the most efficient to use, because it's that final tick that you really want. Also, the more people are inside of your healing bubble, the faster it is going to be eaten up, because every person inside counts as 1 tick, and the heal can only tick so many times. So the more people are in it, the faster it'll get spent. So that is also why you want Desperate Salvations, because you'll get that final tick of healing a lot faster, and that's the one that does the most healing. In terms of Serenade of Courage, you want to get 3 bubbles for that one. So essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get 3 bubbles for Serenade of Courage, but if you know that healing might be necessary, you'll want to like use that heal when you have 1 bar available. And then when you know that you have some extra time to generate like a full 3 bars, that's when you can try and save up for that. Reason being, of course, your Awakening is something that allows you to generate 1 full bar immediately, so this is really easy. And then of course we also have Stigma, we have our Prelude of Courage, I believe it's called, or Prelude of Storm. That also generates a lot. Wind of Music also generates a decent amount. So that is why we want to try and keep those things on cooldown as much as possible, so that we can like generate as much gauge. As you can see, I almost generated a full gauge again, and I don't even have my support set yet, because once you get the support set from the relic gear, you're going to be generating a lot more gauge again as well. So that's kind of how Bard plays. Make sure that your debuff is up, and then try to rotate your damage buffs to make sure that those have the most uptime as possible as well. And then in between that, that's when you want to like do some extra damage, apply some damage buffs, maybe do like some extra damage with your laser beam, and then just kind of keep it going like that. That's pretty much how Bard plays. As for the runes, Conviction Judgment is also kind of very good, because it gives you mana regeneration, which you do kind of need, and it also gives you cooldown reduction, which cooldown reduction is kind of big on Bard as well. So that's why Conviction Judgment is really good to get. Try and get these to legendary as fast as possible, of course. Might take a little while, but it is pretty big. And then also run Focus Runes, because you're going to be struggling with mana if you don't have Judgment Conviction. But yeah, those are all of the 6 classes that I play the most in Lost Ark. I do have more classes that I play outside of this, but those don't have like engraving setup or like a decent stat spread or whatever, because they're like in the middle of tier 2 or just hit tier 3, that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully this was enjoyable for you guys to watch. It's been something that's been asked a few times if I could do one of these. So yeah, there it is. And that's gonna do it for me. So I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.